Hello, I am the High Priest of the Economicon, the Economancer. My life's work is to show you the sacred passages of the Economicon, and today I will be introducing to you an unflinching warrior and policy spellcaster in the Economicon, Byrnes, Education Director for Concerned Veterans for America. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. I am just more than happy to be here and and to work with you because you're somebody that I think highly of. I think the work that you do in the United States, which I'll let you talk about, that is super important. So could you please kind of give everyone a background of what the education director does for Concerned Veterans for America?
Sure. So a little bit about me. Like Joseph, I'm a veteran, but unlike Joseph, I'm twice as stupid as the average veteran because I was a member of both the U.S. Marine Corps and the U.S. Army. So I didn't learn my lesson even the first time. And that I think that makes me 4 times dumber than an Air Force veteran. So, but I am I am the education director for Concerned Veterans for America, and that gives me a couple of hats. Concerned Veterans for America is a grassroots and policy advocacy organization that is kind of focused on preserving the freedoms and the good government policies that our veterans, fought and sacrificed overseas for, and that their families have sacrificed and continue to sacrifice at times for back here at home. I am also, as a kind of additional duty, an additional role to that, I am also the director of Concerned Veterans for America Foundation, which is a 501c3 that is focused solely on connecting, educating, and empowering veterans because we believe that veterans should lead healthy and prosperous lives after their service. And we want to give them the tools and the knowledge to do that and encourage them to go back into their communities and be leaders in those communities to literally be social entrepreneurs who are driving good, positive change in their own communities.
I love that you said social entrepreneur. Something that I talked about in one of my previous videos on entrepreneurship was this Knightian idea of entrepreneurship, that it is what helps exchange ideas that lead to, social growth. So that's a very important idea for me. So obviously everyone who's watched any of my shows know the big idea behind this show is to look at inequality. And as a veteran myself, I've always felt that this is one of those levels of social stratification that doesn't get talked about much, because there are in many instances where it feels like many veterans are put on pedestals, and kind of that creates an inequality in how they're perceived in society. But it also feels like in many instances that they're kind of left behind. I know we had the previous generations, the silent generation. No one really cared what happened to them. So I want to ask, is there a big impact for inequality facing veterans in America today?
So, inequality is an interesting concept. It's hard for me to tease out. The way I think about it, and the way Concerned Veterans for America, Concerned Veterans for America Foundation, and our broader community, and we are part of the Stand Together community. So we are focused on the same challenges, the same kind of things that you describe as inequality, but we like to focus on barriers that keep individuals from reaching their full potential. Because equality and inequality, for you and I think we understand that there's equality of opportunity, not equality of outcomes. But I think when you talk to some people, they start to think of equality as, equality of outcomes. And, you get into that kind of socialist model where it's better for everyone to suffer the same than for a few people to suffer less. Right. And I don't see that. I will say that the veteran experience is full spectrum, right? There are veterans who come out of the military ready to go, and they have incredible lives. I mean, there are the Bob Kerrys, the John Kerrys, the Mike Pompeos of the world who just go on to greater and more things. There are millionaire and near billionaire veteran entrepreneurs, but we're learning through our work that for many, the veteran experience creates as many barriers as it does opportunities in a lot of cases.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's get into some of those barriers. And I do want people to know that, yes, I am with Mr. Byrnes here on the idea of the differences between equality of outcome and equality of, opportunity. And when I'm talking about inequalities, I don't necessarily always mean that these things they carry the negative connotation. They're more like especially because a lot of this is on social stratification. How does social stratification affect our lives? And so I guess the first question is, most people, when they're thinking about veterans in society now, one of the biggest arguments being made is about access to healthcare. Now, this is something that was, a strong provider of votes for the 2016. It wasn't as important from what I saw on the news in the 2020 election. But prior to that, let's even say 2012 to 2016, this was an important driver for policy. Do you think that this is an important part of, inequality when it comes to veterans?
I think it's a major barrier, right? Because veterans suffer, and I'm going to take a step back. I think there's a huge problem, or there's been a historical problem with veterans healthcare to include the dominant force in veterans healthcare, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. But there are other issues with veterans healthcare in the country. There are issues that go beyond just the Veterans Health Administration within the VA to include the benefits and services side, as mostly run by the Veterans Benefits Administration. And we've seen both of those sub administrations of the VA at points of failure in the past decade, right? There was the huge Veterans Benefits Administration backlog back in 2012, 2013. And in 2014, after the Phoenix scandal broke, 7 years ago this week, we saw that there was huge impediments to veterans accessing healthcare properly within the VA healthcare system, the VHA as well. This is a huge barrier for veterans. Again, veterans deserve to live healthy and prosperous lives. Some veterans absolutely need to access healthcare through a VA system, right? And by that, I mean they need the VA to be their primary provider of economic and healthcare commingled, right? So they don't necessarily need to go to the VA, but they do not have the ability to insure themselves, or quite frankly, as if the system's working as it's supposed to, they incurred some kind of disability or some kind of damage while serving in the military, and therefore the VA owes them, or the VA should be taking care of them. There's a couple of interesting things, though, as you talk about healthcare as it applies to veterans. Again, it's administered by the U.S. government, and it's administered by the Department of Veterans Affairs. And yet, all of the other healthcare programs administered by the U.S. government, from TRICARE for the military to Medicare for the elderly to even Medicaid for those who are financially unprepared to take care of themselves and their family medically, all of those programs are choice. Now, it's true that especially with Medicaid, the choices might be a little more limited because of what the dollars are paying. But nonetheless, you do not have to go to a U.S. government Medicaid hospital or Medicaid clinic to get your health care if you're on Medicaid. Interestingly, almost all of the other programs administered by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, not including healthcare, also include full choice. So I went to college twice now on the USGI bill, and both times I got to pick the university that I chose to go to. The VA just came and put the money, some of it into my pocket, some of it directly to the school, and it worked out. And I'm 7 weeks away from a master's program, and I paid for both my master's and my BA through a choice-based program. I also bought 2 houses using the VA home loan program. I didn't have to live in VA housing to do this, right? I didn't have to go to a U.S. government bank. The VA simply guaranteed my home loan to a lender in 2 cases, and I was able to access those programs. So all of government healthcare exhibits choice, except for the healthcare at the Department of Veterans Affairs, at least historically until very recently. It's getting better, although it's far from perfect. And all of the programs, or almost all of the programs that the VA administers outside of healthcare, also offer full choice. But somehow we have this weird point where everybody thinks that veterans should be getting their healthcare at VA systems only. And again, it's getting better. We're starting to open people's eyes. Concerned Veterans for America has been a big part of that. We had the choice card in 2014. The Mission Act expanded it, but the VA is also the second biggest federal bureaucracy, and their bureaucrats are used to digging in and fighting for what they want. Frankly, like other institutional employees, teachers unions, for instance, they bring a lot of weight to bear, and they're very resistant to change. And, we've seen anecdotally that they have continued from the choice card all the way through the Mission Act and its community care through access standards, fought to try and keep themselves as the gatekeeper and to keep as few veterans from accessing choice through community care of their own choosing as they do through programs at the VA, right? They're trying to keep as many people inside the VA as possible.
Now, that raises the question about why would an administration, knowing that it has, a lack of supply with an increased amount of demand, because as we're seeing right now, especially like myself, I was a part of the surge, right? So this was the largest voluntary force that was standing that moved into Afghanistan during, I think it was 10, 11, 12, and 13, right? So this was a large expansion of the military in personnel. And so we're seeing a lot of this being filtered out. So obviously, we know that there is an increased supply, there's an increased supply of soldiers, which is increasing the demand, but there doesn't seem like there's an increase in supply from the veterans side, the veteran administration side, and yet they're still choosing to try to funnel everybody in. What do you think would be the incentive structure for this that kind of creates this perverse situation?
Well, the VA, again, it's the second largest federal agency. It's tied at the hip to the largest federal agency, the Department of Defense, right? Because the Department of Defense creates the constituency for the Department of Veterans Affairs, and it is a very, very heavily unionized workforce within the VA. The Allied Federation of Government Employees, has several 100,000 employees because of the VA, and there are a few other unions that support it. It is a large and opaque bureaucracy. So I have friends who until very recently were at the very top of that bureaucracy, and they wrestled with it every day from the the assistant secretary and the secretary and the chief of staff levels. They wrestled with that bureaucracy. Those members of the senior executive service have been there for many of them for decades through different administrations, and they just see their bureaucracy, like many bureaucracies, have institutional imperative. Keeping things the way they want them is their number one job. And at least as until 2014 and the Phoenix VA scandal, we know that up to that point there were very, very perverse incentives in terms of how those bureaucrats were interacting with the unions, right? So those bureaucrats were lying, falsifying official documents so that they could get bonuses, and the union employees went along with it because it was preserving their jobs, right? And the last thing anybody wanted was for everybody to find out how those corrupt factors were playing together so that we could drive more choice in the VA system. But going back to what you're talking about, demographics, we're experiencing a surge of veterans right now in the system. We experienced the surge after Vietnam. The entire system was, in terms of the Veterans Health Administration, was designed the way it is now, primarily after World War II. And it was designed for that huge surge of veteran population where, 60 or 70% of adult males of military age had served during that war. And literally that many, Americans were entitled to VA healthcare. As we went through Korea, Vietnam, veteran populations, particularly combat veteran populations who were going to be more eligible for service because of higher disability chances, ebbed and flowed. And in fact, we reached the high point of veterans as both a raw number in America and a proportion of our population in the late 80s during Reagan's presidency, because there were some World War I vets still alive. Most World War II vets were still alive. Korean vets were still alive, and we had this huge influx of Vietnam vets in the 10 years, 15 years before that. So we were kind of at the high point, and that's when Ronald Reagan elevated the Department of Veterans Affairs from the Veterans Administration, an independent agency, up to a cabinet level agency, a department. And we've built clinics and hospitals since then, and we had some pauses where before September 11th, the veteran population started to drop down again. Now it's back up because we've had this 20 years of America's longest war going on. This incredible. I was at the first day of the war against terror in New York City at Ground Zero in my National Guard uniform. I've retired since then. I have several nieces who are now of military age, since that war started. So we have this new cohort that you're talking about, but that's not going to last forever. As we record this, the president has announced this morning that September 11th is his new withdrawal date. He's going to count on the Taliban to give him an extra 90 plus days to get out of the country without attacking us. We'll see if it works for him. But with that war ending, it's likely that we'll have fewer veterans in the future. We are once again downsizing our active and even our reserve component military in terms of raw numbers. And in terms of folks doing combat assignments overseas, that will lead to a higher disability rate. Again, we'll have typically fewer clients, and yet we've continued to build these hospitals and clinics. So my answer in a long way around is, isn't it better to have a system based on choice? I mean, we should have some VA hospitals for important things as a base of operations, as centers of excellence, as places in that are good, where there are large concentrations of veterans. But you look at Montana, South Dakota, Texas, Northern California, Alaska, many places where we have decent sized veterans populations. It's incumbent on them to drive 2, 3, 4, 5 hours sometimes, and 8, 10 hours round trip in some cases, just to get healthcare at the VA. Why don't we just use government dollars the way we do in Medicare and Medicaid, so that veterans can go get healthcare where it's convenient for them? And that makes more sense as veteran populations, shrink and grow based on wartime assignments and wartime deployments.
Absolutely. I think anytime that you can increase the amount of choice that individuals make, as well as, force, competition to be moved in. I mean, especially if you have a choice of going where you want, you're going to do your own calculus to figure out what's best for you. And that does drive, incentives for, all of these healthcare providers to do better, because, you're not going to get my money if I find you to be substandard. So you're going to have to raise your standards, because you're not going to get the money. I think that's a great point. So this leads me into the next question. So we know that healthcare is one of the biggest barriers to veterans, but we also see other barriers to veterans. Now, you pointed to the GI Bill. You and I both utilized the GI Bill. Now, when I went through, it was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I loved it. It obviously led me to where I am now. But when I was in the classroom, it was a different world, going straight from being a combat veteran directly into the classroom within less than a year. I mean, that is a strange turnaround for any human being. And, there's a lot of veterans outreach groups within universities and stuff, but do you think that there is some stratification within the classroom for veterans? Because I mean, I know from my personal experience, as well as some others that I worked with, that, sometimes they were looked at as teachers' pets, and they were kind of ostracized by some of the other kids in class, because it was just like, why are you so okay with the teacher and stuff like that? Whereas, we're kind of like bred to be like, yeah, okay, whatever. Or they're more willing to discuss stuff in class and be, I guess you could say, more boisterous. So how do you think that affects veterans?
Well, I mean, veterans are certainly, most of the times when they go to the classrooms, when they're entering the classroom, they're a little more mature than their peers in terms of grade structure. They're a little more self-confident. They've experienced more successes and more importantly, some more failures, so they understand a little better how the world works. The first time I went to college, university on my GI Bill, I started in 2000 actually. I started in 2000 as a student using the GI Bill. I'd been a part-time student before that. And my experience in campus was similar. I was in my early 30s. I was weird compared to the 18, 19, 21-year-olds, and even the 24 and 25-year-olds who were running around at public college in New York City. But I earned respect, and I worked my way through the challenges, and I had the misfortune of getting mobilized to deploy to Iraq in the middle of my last semester. So I was just about to wrap up my credits and graduate, when a month into the semester, and I knew it was probably coming, but I had to start the semester. I had to take a bunch of incompletes. What I really found unfortunate was coming back, and literally the college president of that college within the university had promised me kind of a seamless, deployment and return, no problem. We're gonna take care of it all. And yet, when I get to my final audit of credits, because I had taken incompletes, I got handed this note saying, well, you have to verify that you turned in all this work before this date. And I threw up my hands and I said, burden of proof's not on me, guys. If you don't think I did, then prove it. And immediately, so this is 2005. Immediately after this, I worked with the entire university to stand up a university-wide veterans committee of both students and the registrars and the student affairs folks, to make things better. And what I found out was that this wasn't just going on in my university and the colleges with my university, but it was going on at places like Columbia University and University of California, and that a bunch of veterans who were coming back from the first couple of years of the global war on terror in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq were having similar problems, particularly guys like myself who were in the reserve components, or folks who are having that, your experience coming off of active duty, saying, hey, I'm going to grab this GI Bill and I'm going to go right to college, and having a transition experience. Out of that, you get at first university, college level veterans clubs. And within 5 years or so, 4 years of that, I think it was 2009, some folks that I'm still pretty good friends with ended up kind of bringing that movement, literally movement, together, and getting a bunch of these student veteran clubs to form the Student Veterans for America, which is now probably the biggest veterans organization in terms of membership in America today. Way outpace, especially if you consider folks who graduated and still consider themselves members, way outpacing any one of the big six organizations. And it, if you've ever been to one of their national conventions, my boss, who was the executive director of Concerned Veterans for America, said it perfectly. He said, this is the center of gravity every year for veterans experience in America right now. This is where you have to be if you're in the veterans world. So that's a great example of a bottom-up solution, right? It took half a dozen years, but from the first students like myself coming back from OIF 1 and OIF 2 and running into hurdles and barriers to success, we did grassroots work. We worked with the universities and with other veteran students, and we created a movement. And within 5 years of that, you get Student Veterans for America. You get the new GI Bill, which is I don't know if it's better. It's certainly more user friendly than the Montgomery GI Bill was. It's I don't know if it's better for society because there's no buy-in, but it's certainly a better financial deal for the veteran who goes to use it. So veterans can be very, very good when they spontaneously self-organize at creating great outcomes. They just need to continue to do that. I mean, Derek Blumke, is a great example of a social entrepreneur. He took that movement and turned it into a national organization, working with various other organizations and various members of Congress, and other folks within the veteran sphere to create a movement. He created a movement of literally of millions of veterans.
Absolutely. I was actually one of the co-directors of implementing it into my initial community college, getting a hold of that. I actually think I had worked with you a little bit while we were working together, and getting that implemented at the community college, and it is kept on now. Yeah. No, this was at CVCC.
That's right.
But LR had already had one, but no one ever utilized it because it was such a it wasn't that there wasn't a population of veterans there. It just they were more disaggregated. Like at CVCC, we had a room, we had things, we could get together, we coalesced, we exchanged ideas. We would run tutorships through there where you could go in there and get tutoring and all of that without having to go through, the actual tutoring facility. And so that was all. It was all kept in house and very close to the chest. Whereas at Lenore Ryan, it was very open, and it was, there wasn't a whole lot of camaraderie, and that was mainly because a lot of these people, they were much older. Many of them, like myself, had already had a family. They were moving through. They'd already completed all the tasks that they needed. They just wanted to go to school, get it done, and get out. And so they didn't really participate much in any type of club function. But so that leads me to really one of the funny questions, and this is something that people outside of the military may not have a complete grasp on, is stratification within the military. It's built into the system, right? So you have privates. Well, this is from the Army. You got private second class, private first class, specialist, corporal, and then you go into your non-commissioned officer ranks, into your officer ranks, and everything is stratified. And even within those stratifications, right, you have I don't want to say good privates and bad privates, but you have the private that who's going to end up being the leader. And then all of this stratification is built into the system. And yet this is one of the few places that you don't really hear a lot of aversion to inequality that, is typical in modern day language, right? So do you think that veterans more specifically, when they come out of the military, do you think they're less averse to the inequalities that they're going to face in life? And this may be a primary driver to why you don't hear a lot of, I guess you could say, kicking and screaming about the inequalities that veterans may face?
Well, military life is stratified, without a doubt. Obviously, there's a rank structure. There's no way around it. But it is also one of the, at least in the American military, one of the, the closest examples that you can get to a real meritocracy at the same time, right? I mean, yes, there's always going to be two tiers within the military, right? There's going to be the enlisted ranks and the officer ranks, but certainly, somebody who works hard as an enlisted man and gets himself up to E7 or level or better is in terms of like real respect and real influence within the organization, better off than the lower ranks of the officer corps in a lot of ways. Other than that, though, I mean, yeah, and I said meritocracy. Yes, there is a prejudice for certain natural gifts. Certainly, especially in the Marine Corps and the Army in particular, physical fitness and the ability to shoot and a few other things, intelligence will probably, those three qualities will probably help you achieve rank faster than folks who don't quite have the same natural gifts. But it's a rule of fact that even in those organizations, hard work will get you elevated in that meritocracy, and only those who can't wrap their heads around, the idea of hard work and self-discipline, and either just don't put in the work or get themselves in trouble, will not rise through the meritocracy. I think that veterans, because they experience that a lot, take that back into civilian life. And look, one of the big barriers that veterans have is that transition back to civilian life, and it's very different for a lot of different veterans. I think a very small percentage of veterans come out of that stratified two-tier society, and they're really, really challenged to succeed in civilian life. But I think the vast majority of them see that hard work can get you success, and they're even better prepared than a lot of folks to achieve things. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't other barriers that they need to overcome, but once they figure out those barriers, they're usually able to do pretty well and thrive. It's the ones who are still in that transition space, or the ones who have some real challenge to getting past there, that my organization on the 501c3 side, Concerned Veterans for America Foundation, really wants to target and try and drive them so that they learn what they need to break down those barriers. And to their peers who are already figuring it out, we want to turn them into those social entrepreneurs to turn around and help their brothers and sisters. In fact, this month, April 2021, Concerned Veterans for America Foundation, the foundation side is kicking off a project. We're in the middle of it, called Believe in Veterans, and we're using our voice, so social media, earned media, on our web pages and stuff, to tell people that veterans are great social entrepreneurs, and they can help other veterans. They can help their communities, and we're just pointing out examples of things like the Veteran Life Center here in North Carolina, where they're doing that, right? Transition housing with life skills teaching, so that veterans can become self-sufficient. The Headstrong Project, we talked about VA healthcare a little bit. One of the groups that CVA Foundation has partnered with over the years is the Headstrong Project, providing world-class mental health care to veterans who suffer the incredible barrier of post-traumatic stress disorder and sometimes the incumbent depression and substance abuse problems that come with that. World-class mental health care at no cost to those veterans, way better than they can get in government-sponsored VA mental health. And it's because a Marine Corps veteran who grew up, in a good place in the two-tiered society, right? Son of wealthy Connecticut, but joined the Marine Corps, did the right thing. When he came home, he was chumming with some Wall Street buddies, and they realized that that they could access that kind of healthcare because of their money, but veterans deserved it, and they put together this organization. So we believe in veterans, and there are tons of bottom-up solutions out there. Personally, I think that's the best way to end some of this inequality, some of these external and internal barriers, is to empower those closest to the problem, to challenge them, to take a principled approach and break down those barriers.
Awesome. I'm glad you said that. And so the next one I was going to talk about, and this is one of those mildly controversial, depending on how you take it, is the barrier of mental health when it comes to veterans. Now, one of the impetuses behind me working with creating a veterans club at CVCC was mostly because I've seen a lot of issues when it comes to veteran mental health. I've seen a lot of veterans very They were angry. They didn't have the same output that they could have because they were facing a lot of these things, and it was part of the transition getting into civilian life, moving from one style of being to another. And then, you're trying to find this level of meaning where that can activate you, and whether it's your imaginary or your hard working capabilities. And if you're not activating something, you're just stagnating. You know what I mean? And so that was a big function of that. But mental health was something that was consistently brought up. I had worked with a few psychologists when I was at Lenore, going into what was the criteria that they were using for PTSD and stuff like that when it comes to veterans? Was it different than the other types of PTSD? How did it function? And obviously this is a whole long conversation with a psychologist, but it is a barrier to veterans. And it's not just a barrier that a veteran may face it and that they may have to deal with that internally. It's also a barrier to veterans who are trying to find jobs, right? So I remember when I first got out, it was like, oh, well, you'll have veterans preference, but we're not sure how much that veterans preference is going to work for you, because when you get out, a lot of people are going to see you as, like, I don't want to say broken, but that was the air around it. It was just like, oh, well, you were a combat vet. Oh, yeah, I was. Well, there's got to be something, going on. And there was a lot of stigma involved with, mental health issues in veterans. So now you were there, prior to kind of this like large intervention in mental health with veterans. How do you think it has worked out? Do you think it's reduced some of the stratification, or do you think that this kind of stigma, which I think is actually like gone almost out the door now, but how do you think that's helped veterans in society and with, social stratification?
Well, I think the conversation that we've had since 2003, 2004, as we started to realize that we were getting this new cohort of folks who were highly susceptible to post-traumatic stress. And I'll stop it there. I'll say post-traumatic stress, right? Because you can have post-traumatic stress and not post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And typically, if you're looking at somebody, particularly somebody, again, in the reserve component of the National Guard, who last week, 30 days ago, last month, might have been in a firefight, outside of Kabul or outside of Baghdad, and is now walking out the gate of the reprocessing station at Fort Drum or Fort Riley or something like that. 30 days ago, they were in a firefight. Now they're going to the living room. That it's typically not like that when you're coming off active duty. I mean, it can be, but we had a huge cohort that was doing that because of our National Guard deployments. So it elevated the idea of post-traumatic stress. I think one of the things that created some stigma around the issue back 15, 16 years ago was this lack of differentiation between post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder, right? You and I both suffered from post-traumatic stress, right? I mean, we came home, it's not only did you see and do and hear and live in stuff that was traumatic overseas, but it's also, you think about, like, again, that journey whether it's active duty where it's bad, or from a reservist perspective, having all of those life stressors. You look at those things in life that stress you, right? There's that list from the 70s and 80s, moving, changing your job, changing your health circumstances, like so many of those things, changing your house, right? So many of those things just are inherent and demobilizing. So people come home from overseas stressed out. If they had seen trauma or experienced trauma, they're more stressed out. If you talk to them 6 months, a year later, most of them have figured it out. They've just gone back to working out. They've gone back to their social group, and they've worked through their stuff. Some people have serious problems and can't get past it. Those are the ones who have post-traumatic stress disorder. They're stuck in that situation. I think that we've done, because that happened, and because, we were at a moment where, in 2004, 5, many more people were college educated. Many more people were open to mental health treatment than were in, say, 73, 4, 5. The last time this kind of happened, we've done a better job as a society as a whole in addressing this. In fact, I always thought it was very odd, 8, 10 years ago, there was this thing about veterans with PTSD and the Second Amendment, and people were freaking out. Is PTSD going to be counted, as one of the mental disorders that enables the government to just take my guns away? And I remember, saying, I might have even said it to you. Well, if that happens, they're going to have to take away almost every cop in America's gun, because almost all of them have post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic stress disorder, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
it's not just veterans. Most
Yep.
cops. In fact, I would venture that more cops, percentage-wise, suffer from some kind of post-traumatic stress than veterans, because plenty of veterans, don't see any combat. Plenty of veterans don't see that, and cops don't necessarily need to get in a shootout to see that trauma all the time, right? They see accidents. They're in very, very tense situations where they may be in danger. They see other people being violent to each other. So they're just as susceptible, if not more, than the veterans community. So I think that society has changed its approach to post-traumatic stress, and the incumbent, or the attached other issues. Again, depression is big. Substance abuse and addiction come out of post-traumatic stress. Other, anxiety disorders come out of post-traumatic stress. We've done a better job at recognizing it. I think the barrier has lowered for veterans to opportunities in terms of the reputational risk, but many veterans still suffer in silence. And while they may be able to go out and get a job, they're not able to self-fulfill and reach that Maslow's, eve, that Maslow's peak, where they're really operating at their best, and they can get to where they would do best in a meritocracy if they didn't have that internal barrier of post-traumatic stress.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think this is also better, driven by a lot of the grassroots movements. Seeing, visualizing, like you said. This Marine, he had gone through. He came from something. He's seen it. He said, "I need to do something because I was there. I understand the structure, the stressors. It would be better for me rather than some bureaucrat in Washington who has no idea what's going on." I think that speaks volumes to the social entrepreneurship that you were talking about. That's veterans, which, if a lot of people don't know, veterans are actually one of the largest, I guess you could say, subgroups of population in the United States. And entrepreneurship is like one of the single biggest factors of veterans. It's actually, veterans are, I think, probably the most highly educated subgroup that I think you can name. And then secondly, they're also the highest, actually, I think second highest subgroup of entrepreneurship in the United States. It's actually overwhelmingly insane how good some of these people are. I mean, it's amazing to me.
And if you look, back at the veterans experience, after the Spanish American War, we got the Veterans of Foreign War, we got the American Legion, and then after World War I, we got the Veterans of Foreign War, or vice versa, one or the other. But and then we had the Vietnam Veterans of America after Vietnam. In there, you got paralyzed vets, disabled vets, and those were the old time big six mainline organizations. And in their own way, in their own day, especially the first two, the Legion and the VFW, they were kind of examples of social entrepreneurship back then. Veterans banding together to build community and to do things, and building that community probably helped them overcome, the post-traumatic stress they suffered from their experiences in the case of combat vets. And it helped them push for policies that helped them. But those ideas got stale. If you look at the new organizations that, the broad spectrum of organizations that exist today, a lot of them, even if their mission isn't to prevent or to alleviate post-traumatic stress, they're doing it anyway, right? So, and they're all social entrepreneurs. Student Veterans for America, that connection in the classrooms has probably helped students with stress of being in that environment. Team Rubicon, right? Giving back to their communities, continue the mission, right? Started off, almost 15 years ago, I guess now, the idea of, helping folks in another country quickly, kind of reduced down to, wait, we could do this at home, and we can get a lot more veterans participating in it. And a lot of those veterans have found meaning in service, which again alleviates that post-traumatic stress, gives them the opportunity to feel fulfilled, and now they're able to find their own ways for social entrepreneurship. Team Red, White, and Blue, right? I mean, how many veterans have been helped out of, without it being part of their stated mission, helped out of PTS or depression or anxiety or substance problems, because now they just get up with Team Red, White, and Blue and do the workout of the day 2 or 3 times a week. And they have that community with fellow veterans, and they're doing something that's good for their body. So those are all examples of social entrepreneurs who started these veterans organizations that are helping veterans. Those bottom-up solutions, that principled approach, right? Going with what you learned in the military in terms of principle, figuring out those closest to the problem, what are their solutions? I mean, that's how these social entrepreneurs are continuing to break barriers.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's something I pride myself in being a veteran and seeing other veterans going out and achieving and doing great things. It's something that I'm as proud of that as I am of my own service to my country. All right, so I have another question, and this one gets into you. Now, you had talked about being a reservist, and people don't know this, but when it comes to unemployment and suicide rates, I know we hear a lot about, active duty, coming out of active duty, struggling with employment, coming out of active duty, and very high suicide rates. But people don't know. And I'm not trying to take anything away from active duty. I was active duty myself when I came out. I understand that. But people don't understand that the National Guard actually has a much, much higher unemployment rate, and it also has a higher suicide rate. Now, you had talked a lot about this earlier, when it comes from, you know, you're just working one day and the next day you're gone, you're overseas, you're having to deal with this, you get back, you get 2 weeks maybe of reprocessing, and then boom, you're right back to your job. So when it comes to how veteran reprocessing or in processing should be handled. Do you think that we're kind of failing on this task and that there's a lot more that we can do? Or do you think in general that this is, the best we can do?
You know, that the reserve component, including the reserves and the National Guard, always gets a short shrift from the active duty side, right? They just don't understand the experience. I think, in my experience, probably the Marine Corps does the best at it, simply because, um, uh, unlike the Army, where you can be a full timer within the Army Reserves or in the Army National Guard, and that's your job, and you're going to be in that job, living in that house in that state for 20 years if you want to be. The Marine Corps, that's those full-time jobs within the reserve rotate out of the fleet, out of the Marine Corps. They do those so their full-timers kind of carry that full-time ethos into the reserves, and they also carry that experience back as as first sergeants and sergeants major, and as captains and colonels, to understand that it's an important component. They do a better job at it. But even there's a little bit of a short shrift, because the needs of the big Army, the needs of the Fleet Marine Force, are what count more than the needs of the reservists. I've been saying this for years. This is something that really the answer needs to happen for at least for the National Guard in the state headquarters, where there's an ability to connect back to the community, because it's a two-tiered organization in terms of its governance, right? The state government can drive directives that affect National Guard folks. They can then, kind of take those programs as examples of excellence, as lessons learned, and share them with the Army Reserve, the Navy Reserve, et cetera, et cetera. But it's always going to be something of an issue. It is a huge issue for reservists and National Guardsmen, particularly those who are really young. You were talking about privates first class, very young specialists, even young corporals, who maybe were doing this while they were doing this as their, not necessarily their primary job, but kind of the best job they had. They maybe had a Joe job at the local coffee shop or local, Dollar General, or they're working in agriculture down east in North Carolina, all kinds of experiences like that. And being, part of their reserve unit or National Guard unit is a big part of kind of their adult career, their adult direction. And then they go overseas, and it kind of, it's suddenly not a great experience anymore when they come back, and they're disconnected. They have that post-traumatic stress. And I mean, because you were in, vast numbers of our reserve component don't live in, urban stratified East or West Coast. They live in very rural or semi-rural places where they're not as connected. The other big difference in terms of post-traumatic stress and suicide and addiction between active duty and the reserves is the platoon sergeant, the squad leader. Like, on active duty, whether it's on the Navy or section chief, whoever your first line and second line supervisors are, you live with them, right? They're down the hall, they're in your hip pocket, they're stopping by your room on Tuesday night. They check on your hangover on Sunday morning. They know what's going on in your life, and if they get suicide awareness training, which they do, or PTSD awareness training, which they do, and they see it, they have the opportunity to intervene very early because they have authority in your life. They're there all the time. and they can use the institution very quickly to make an outcome. Take that back to the National Guard kid who's 22, did a combat tour, has a little bit of post-traumatic stress, starts using whatever he starts using, or drinking too much or whatever, and he's living in Eden, North Carolina. He doesn't see his platoon sergeant and his squad leader and his team leader but once a month. And sometimes if he misses a drill for good reason or bad, it could be longer than that. And if he goes into a downward spiral, nobody in that chain of command is going to be able to help him. It's only the people around him. So we need to do, or I hope we can do, a better job of connecting those folks around our reservists, through things like the Family Readiness Group and, Concerned Veterans for America, our C4 policy organization, or maybe it's our CF. I don't know. One of my colleagues down in Florida is starting it up. I think it's CVA Foundation, the 501c3. He's starting up. It's brand new. We haven't even named it, but the idea is to work with recruiters to identify kids from high school and right after high school who are enlisting, and connect with them and offer them the opportunity to be partners with them and their family. So when they go through their experience, they have someone that they can ask questions of, someone that they can rely on. And if they're reservists, someone in their community who can point them to resources that isn't their platoon sergeant. So we're trying that out, trying to sponsor kids and help their parents through the experiences. They go through basic training and build community with them. Because again, those young men and women are going to come back and be social entrepreneurs in 4 or 8 or 20 years.
Absolutely. I think that is another brilliant idea. I think Concerned Veterans for America, all of its affiliates, I think they're doing a great job with veterans. Again, that's one of the big reasons for me bringing you onto the show, is because you have such a broad amount of knowledge when it comes to this, as well as personal experience. And a lot of this is taking a holistic approach, getting a lot of this experiential treatment from individuals and knowing what is and is not. Now, obviously, neither you nor I can speak for all veterans. Neither of us can really speak for well, I can't speak directly for any organization that I'm a part of. But what I can say from my own experience and how I felt through, the inequality and social stratification lens as a veteran, I actually have pointed this out on a few occasions to friends of mine that, going back to that averse to stratification, is that most of the veterans I knew, they were really averse to the consequences of inequality, the consequences of social stratification. They thought this is a natural part of life. If you have a meritocracy, you're going to have differences in outcomes. And so long as there's not barriers, that everything works. But we do know that there are barriers, and we have great organizations like Concerned Veterans for America, as well as its affiliates, that are help trying to break down these barriers and bringing more equality of opportunity. And as we have this, higher levels of equality of opportunity, we're obviously going to see this increasing amount of social entrepreneurship from veterans. I think it's one of their biggest, outside of just blood, sweat, and tears for their country, this social entrepreneurship, whether it's, it's individuals like Matt Best, they bring comedy, a little bit of, social commentary and stuff like that to the picture, as well as, other forms of veterans. I think it was, the action figure guys. I can't remember the name of it. It was a couple old veterans, especially with the GWAT guys coming out. They really didn't have anything to look towards, because, especially in that like stage right there where I was at with the surge, there was some of the old veterans, but most of the old veterans, they didn't really care as much. They were kind of ambiguous to the idea. But the GWAT, because it was such a stressful situation, there was a lot of camaraderie just built directly into the GWAT group. And so having some of the Vietnam veterans and Korean veterans, kind of help us along the way until we can get on our feet and really move through. And I think, this grassroots mobilization of veterans has been one of the most important things that veterans can do for the United States, outside of just the blood, sweat, and tears. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time. I know you have a busy day. I know you've got all of these things that you're doing, and it's amazing to me. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. And, I'm sure everybody here that's watching, all one person. I see you, one person. You never comment, one person who watches. You always just watch me. Are you my stalker? No. All jokes aside, thank you so much.
Happy to come on, Joseph. Absolutely. And you know, I know maybe only one person's watching, but I understand this is going to be hung on YouTube. So
Absolutely. Yes. And you know, it's going to be there for the whole world to see. I hope everybody watches, enjoys. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, I've got in the link. I'm going to have the YouTube channel for Concerned Veterans of America. There's some great talks going on in there about policies. I'm going to have Mr. Byrnes here shoot me some more links so that you can, you know, so you can actually utilize all of these. If you are a veteran or you know someone who's a veteran and you want to reach out and you want to get this to reach out to them so that they know, you know, the more people, the better. This is how we conduct change, especially in the United States. And with that, do you have any last words for yourself?
So yeah, I will absolutely shoot you our links. Primary one is www.cv4a.org, but we have www.cvafoundation.org as well. And I'm happy to send you those links so that you can put them up in the comments. And Joe, thanks for having me on. And you know, I hope your listeners, you know, take away the importance of, you know, believing in veterans, believe in vets, believe in people, but believe in veterans. They really could do great things for our country.
Absolutely, absolutely, and thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day,
Good
and
talking to
I'm
you,
gonna
brother.
good talking to you. Bye bye.